Hi everyone, welcome to Exploring with Scientists, How Do Some Frogs Avoid Extinction? Today we're going to be talking about part 2, all about frogs, and this is part 2 of a 4-part series. So let's start from the beginning and actually define what a frog is. So frogs are a type of amphibian that have no tail. Amphibians are a big group of animals. So if we think about other groups of animals, right, we have mammals, which we're a part of, things like dogs, cats, everything that's basically furry and gives live birth. We have birds, we have amphibians, which we'll talk about, and we have reptiles, we have fish. So those big kind of groups that we kind of categorize animals into. Amphibians are one type of that group. There are 3 different kinds of amphibians: a frog, a salamander, which is very similar to a frog but has a tail, and then a caecilian, which you've probably never heard of or seen. We don't have any here in North America, and so they're kind of rare. There are definitely not as many as frogs. So frogs have these characteristics of all amphibians, which means that they're cold-blooded. So things like mammals like us, we have an internal regulator that keeps our body the same temperature all the time. Things that are cold-blooded, they have to move around in their environment to get warm. And so things like frogs, this is why you'll see reptiles are also cold-blooded. So this is why you'll see things like snakes and turtles on warm days kind of basking in the sun. So they have that characteristic. And they also have this special kind of skin that needs a lot of water. And this is because it's very porous, which means that water can pass through very easily. And so when they're actually in the water, they don't drink like through their mouth, they drink through their skin. So they'll be sitting in a pond and they have on their belly what's called a drink patch. And this is where water can go really easily through their skin, and that's how they get water into their bodies. But because they can absorb water really quickly, this also means they can lose water really quickly. And so they can dry out and have their skin dehydrate really quickly. And this is why you'll commonly find a lot of frogs and other amphibians near a water source, either in a pond or very close by to streams and ponds and lakes. So I also want to talk about the caveat for this definition that some frogs do have tails temporarily. Frogs are a very kind of popular for this process of metamorphosis, which is changing from one form to the other. So a lot of frogs, like you may know that a lot of frogs lay eggs in the water. Those eggs hatch into tadpoles, and there are tadpoles that swim around in the water, and they spend all of their time as a tadpole in the water. And they slowly start to grow legs and transform. This is the process of metamorphosis into frogs, and then transition on land and either live completely on land or partially inland in water. So this is a picture here of a froglet, a frog that's in the middle of transforming from a tadpole into a frog. And so you may see, if you've already seen, or maybe you will see in the future, little baby froglets that are in the middle of that stage, and they do have a tail. So frogs have no tail, but it's only when they transform all the way into a frog. Why would we want to study frogs? A lot of us probably have this conception of frogs as these slimy, creatures that just live in the woods or in the water, but we don't know a lot about them. I'm very interested in studying frogs because of the diversity of frogs. So the things that they do, the variation and all the different kinds, things that they do, what they look like, the patterns that they have, their behaviors. So frogs do different things, like there are some frogs that live in trees, some that live in water, and some that live on land. So tree frogs, a gray tree frog you might have seen if you are around Michigan. Bullfrogs are the green frogs that live in the water and ponds, and then American toads and things that burrow in the ground and live in forests. They make these beautiful, elaborate calls. We can often identify the species by the call that they have. They also usually congregate during the mating season and things like ponds. And they're all calling, and so they make this beautiful chorus that you can hear. They have really cool defense mechanisms. So there's poison dart frogs that have these really cool colors that tell predators, don't eat me, I don't taste good. American toads also, so a lot of toads, you might have heard that they cause warts, and they don't actually cause warts. But they do, some of those warts are glands that are on their back that have a toxin. So animals that eat them realize that they don't taste good. They have a chemical that makes them either taste bad or poisons them. So they spit them out. And so they have cool ways of also defending against predators. So there are so many cool ways that frogs interact with other animals in their environment. To give you an example of how many frogs there are more frogs than all mammals combined. So there are about 7,000 species of frogs. There are about 6,000 species of mammals. And so everything that's a mammal that you can think of, basically everything that's cute and cuddly and furry. So things like humans, dogs, rabbits, giraffes, lions, whales, mice, all those kind of things. If you group them into, put them all in a group together that we call mammals, there are less mammals, all of those different things, than just frogs. So it's so cool to tell people about how many frogs there are, because we kind of generally don't think about how many there are and understand how many different ways, how many different environments they live in, ways they interact with those environments, and things like that. So it's a really, really cool to study for that reason. Frogs are also really important for their habitat, for their environment that they live in. So this picture here is a forest in South America. And from afar, we kind of look at this as just an existing landscape of just this kind of big green bush. But if we zoomed in, all of this that we see is kind of a different organism. There are thousands of different plants in this picture, and just like animals, plants need resources like sunlight and water, and they compete with each other for those resources. And they make up that permanent kind of landscape for things to live on and interact with and eat them and get protection from them, like frogs and other things and insects. So if we kind of zoomed into this, we would see so many different interactions between different kinds of animals, different kinds of plants that make the system that we call the habitat. And each one of those things that interact in that way are necessary for that habitat to exist. So if we think about what frogs do in the environment, they eat a lot of things. They eat things like insects. For example, they eat a lot of mosquitoes, depending on where they are. So if frogs disappeared, we would have a lot more mosquitoes. And other insects that eat plants and maybe spread diseases to other animals. And so if frogs were gone from the system, things that they eat would rise in number because they wouldn't have any predators, and that would cause an imbalance and maybe make other things disappear, like some of the plants or other animals that those things have a negative effect on if they have too many of them. Frogs also have predators, right? So they're a food source for other things above them, like snakes and birds. And so if they disappeared, we would also lose the snakes and the birds that are in this picture. And a lot of those things are important for the plants that spread seeds, like birds, and so a tree that like lays acorns or things like that. Things like squirrels and birds that spread those to help the forest grow and be maintained. So there are a lot of things, just like any animal or plant, frogs play a really important role in their environment. And we should care about frogs and want to preserve them for their own sake, because frogs are awesome and really cool organisms. But also, they're important for other organisms too. So if we lost them, we would also lose other things. Another example of why we need to care for them is we as humans directly benefit from them. So we need healthy habitats to be able to do a lot of the things we do. We need habitats to get wood from to build things, to build houses, to have paper. We need clean water sources, which are from habitats, things like rivers. If we don't have healthy habitats, we can't have rivers and different water sources that we get. We get a lot of food sources from things like rivers and agriculture, where we grow crops and depend on pollinators, things like bees that transfer pollen, but that live in places like this. And so we as humans also directly benefit from frogs existing and habitats being happy and healthy and large enough to kind of persist for a very long time. So frogs play this very important role in keeping their habitat healthy. Why I think I've been putting so much emphasis on the importance that frogs play in their habitats is because they're disappearing a lot quicker than a lot of other animals and plants. So they're kind of disappearing globally all over the world from things like climate change, pollution, and habitat loss, right? We're cutting too much of their forests down. We're polluting different trash and plastics into the environment. We're using fossil fuels that contribute to greenhouse gases and climate change. But they're also experiencing diseases. And we are probably all very familiar as going through the COVID-19 pandemic. Frogs have also been going through a pandemic for almost 40 years, almost 4 decades. So we'll give our frogs some masks to signify that they're going through this pandemic. This is caused by the chytrid fungus. That's causing what we call a panzootic. So some vocabulary for you. Pandemic is a pandemic for humans. That same disease spread that's happening in other animals is called a panzootic. So pan is the same first part of the word for panzootic and pandemic, but demic refers to humans, and zootic refers to in other non-human animals. So they're going through a panzootic, and it's caused by the chytrid fungus, which is a microscopic fungus. So a lot of us probably think of fungi as mushrooms, and that's a type of fungus. But there are a lot of other fungi that are microscopic, so you need a microscope to see them because they're so small. So that's what type of fungus this is, and it actually infects their skin. So we talked about how important frog skin is for getting water and other things into their body. And so the chytrid fungus actually infects their skin and kind of covers it and makes it hard for anything to pass through, and that's how they eventually die of this skin infection. So frogs also are really important to study because they kind of need our help. So to recap, frogs are cool. There's a lot of things that they do, a lot of things that we don't understand about them yet, and we should care about them because they play important roles for their environment, and they also kind of need our help. They're disappearing from a lot of the things that we do. Thanks for joining me for part 2 to learn all about frogs.